Welcome back to Hot Takes and Deep Dives, and my next guest is one of the most sought-after comedy writers in the industry. He has written lines for Bette Midler, Rosie O'Donnell, Whoopi Goldberg, and Robin Williams, just to name a few. His new collection of essays, It Seemed Like a Bad Idea at the Time, chronicles his biggest flop projects. Hi, Bruce Vilanch.
Hi there.
I just mentioned I've been seeing you and following your whole career since I was a literal child living on Long Island. And you always had a signature look, which was this very like Muppet-like hair. You had a big bushy beard. And of course, like at one point I was like, oh, he straightened his hair and he shaved his facial hair. What was the impetus for changing that signature look?
Well, at first, the beard came off for Hairspray, the musical, where I played Edna Turnblad, and I could not talk them into a bearded lady. Mm-hmm. They said, that's a little too John Waters. They said, the audience will buy it's a man playing a woman in this relationship, but they won't buy that he's playing a woman with a hormone problem. So the beard went after 32 years. And the hair, I don't know, I started taking some medications that straightened my hair by, as a side effect. And people kept saying, dude, you're going to that Japanese hair straightening place? But I said, no, it's always curly. And then whatever this combination of drugs I'm on, it straightened it. So I thought, okay, I'll live with that. I'll have a page boy forever.
Does it feel strange not to have the big beard?
Oh, it was amazing. First of all, it got shaved on, Regis and Kelly. That's how long ago. Uh-huh. And the guy, they brought a barber from Little Italy who actually cut me. I bled on air. I bled from my art. But it felt weird because this had all been covered over. So it was like baby skin. Mm-hmm. It had been, I lived in Chicago and then LA. And so it was not weathered. And so people can, you look so much younger. And so I keep it off. I said, okay, I live in LA. You look younger? Fine. Good.
You just mentioned you shaved it for Hairspray. You replaced Harvey Fierstein in Hairspray. Yeah. Who was your co-star?
I had several different girls who played my daughter, starting with Carly Gibson, who then went to Broadway, and the understudy took over, and that was Keala Settle, who got famous being a bearded lady in The Greatest Showman with Hugh Jackman, mm-hmm. and then on tour with Hugh, and now she's a thing. So I'm delighted that she's happened. But I had a lot of different girls. Leslie Kritzer was another one who went on to do a lot of Broadway stuff.
Yeah.
So Darlene Love came in to play Motormouth.
Oh, that's amazing.
Broadway. Yeah, it was fabulous. It was like history.
Just last night, I rewatched Get Bruce, which I initially saw at the Angelica Movie Theater here, the Angelica Film Center.
Sure, yeah.
When it came out in 1998. And because I knew we were doing this today, I'm like, I got to rewatch this. And it is such a time capsule for the stars of my childhood. And yeah. I mean, and perhaps the funniest person in the movie is your mom.
Absolutely. She's the star. She and Robin Williams are the stars. They're really both very funny. And of course, we knew Robin, but my mother was a surprise to everybody. Although I got a lot of timing from her.
Yeah. And it's so Get Bruce is a documentary that was made about your whole career, how you got started, and it really showcases a lot of the celebrities who you have become known for writing for. And
Harvey Weinstein produced it, who never laid a hand on me.
It is jarring when the film starts and it says Miramax. It is a jump. Yeah, right. It is a jump scare.
Well, you forget they're still around, although Miriam and Max long gone. And so is Harvey. The brand still exists, and I forget who actually owns it now. But the movie, when Disney bought Miramax, it became a library item for Buena Vista Home Video. Mm-hmm. And that's where it's had its big shelf life and its big residual life. Because, it was a limited documentary release in 99. So, that whatever money has come in has come as a result of that sale.
Harvey,
thank you.
I love the scenes between you and Billy Crystal. That's when I really loved watching the Academy Awards. We just had the Academy, Honora just won for Best Picture. And I find it so interesting.
Well, Conan just got re-upped today.
I know he did. Yeah, so Conan got re-upped.
It was very successful. Actually, I think when they did the final tally, it topped the Barbenheimer show the year before, which no one expected.
They show you over the course of the time of filming how you're working out jokes, between you and Whoopi. You're on different coasts. But I'm thinking back in the 80s when you did have to rapidly communicate with people and the speed of communication was obviously much slower. Were you just doing it all on the phone?
Well, yeah. It was on the phone. And I remember when voicemail came in, this was new. Because everybody had answering machines, and before that, answering services. If you've ever seen the movie called Bells Are Ringing, based on a Broadway show, that was about a woman who ran an answering service. And I look at it now, and people are kind of go, well, what's that exactly? And I said, well, it's probably only used by escort services now, where you have to have that personal touch. But back then, that was how everything was done, and there was snail mail, and there used to be a thing called the pouch.
What's that?
That all the studios and networks and agencies had. It was a thing that flew overnight on the red eye from LA to New York, where they would send scripts and contracts and things like that. And that was how you get something from New York. They'd say, well, put it in the pouch tonight. And the next morning it would be at your doorstep. So also, the sad part of all that for me was all the cute messengers were then out of work. You got to meet a lot of hot guys because they were bringing stuff, delivering. And that, it's Grubhub really does not come up to snuff in that department. I'm sorry to report. Jess does not cut it.
I love when your mom is first introduced in Get Bruce, how you were adopted at 4 days old by your parents. And and I love how you say the first malady that was inflicted upon you was being taken. You were born in the hospital in New York City, and you were immediately moved to New Jersey, and that was the first crime.
That was the first of many slights. Unintentional on their part, of course. I mean, they were, my mother was actually from Brooklyn, but
really,
yeah, Avenue L and Ocean Parkway. But my father was from Jersey, so when she married him, she settled with him. He was practicing in Jersey as an optometrist.
And I think it's so interesting how it seems like a lot of people in your family are not blood related. Like, who else is adopted?
I know. Oh, well, in my adopted family, there's a picture of me and my mother and my grandmother, and none of us are related by blood. My grandmother was my mother's stepmother. My actual grandmother, her grandmother, died when she was 8 years old. So when she was 16, my grandfather remarried, and this became her stepmother. And my grandmother, the only grandmother I knew, and we were all very tight. And we actually began to look alike, which I think is what they say about people and their dogs, and I guess people and certain relatives, even if you're not related to them, because you all kind of make the same family expressions. But we all look, there was at my bar mitzvah, there's a whole table of people who are not blood related, but are all thick as thieves. Some of them are thieves. And now I found my birth family. After my mother died, which was it was at 95, she held on. Her joke was, the first 90 years are easy. The second 90 are a bitch.
Yes.
So when she went at 95, I finally spit into a cup, because you could do that. Mm-hmm. You could never. I was younger, and about 7 years later, a first cousin showed up and opened up this whole other family. So I've now found, and the fun part of it is my birth mother was a showgirl. She had a career as a dancer, and there are many home movies of her. So she had a big personality. So between the two of them, it seemed like osmosis, nature and nurture.
Yeah.
Go no. Yeah,
that's amazing.
And now we're isolating my father, who's been gone for years, but he was also in show business on the management side.
So you were meant to be doing this. It was inevitable.
I guess. Well, mother had me when she was 16, and it was like a backseat boogie thing, and she was, or I think she was probably in love with the guy, but he walked away. He was 16 also, apparently. So it's a very dramatic thing, and if we can nail him down, then I'll have the next book. Will be that saga, and maybe we'll sell it to Hallmark or Lifetime, depending on how happy the ending is.
Before we get into your book, which really chronicles like your biggest flops, or it's kind of like there's actually a podcast called How Did This Get Made? It's very along those themes.
But
I actually want to talk. I'm actually very, very interested in these icons who you've worked with, particularly your work with Bette Midler. And I know that like a lot of your work started with her. She was performing a nightclub act at the Continental Baths, which you know that there's a performance artist here. Her name is Amber Martin. She recreates the Bette Midler Baths.
She just worked out here with John Cameron Mitchell. They just did a show together at Catalina, which is not the island, the jazz club.
Yes.
And I couldn't go that night, but I kept hearing, because she works a lot on Fire Island, from my friend Danny Nardicchio. He books her into clubs there, Ice Palace, whatever they call it.
Yes.
So
I was literally gonna tell you how she does it on Fire Island, and it's called Bette Bathhouse and Beyond.
Bette Bathhouse and Beyond, yes.
And she's done it in the Pines, and now she does it in Cherry Grove. I've gone to this. You have to strip down, and the audience, you are in a towel, and they literally recreate Bette Midler at the baths. And so what was she doing when you first laid eyes on her?
Well, I'd seen her at the baths because I was, told to go see her, but I actually didn't work with her until she played Chicago. And she played Mr. Kelly's, and her manager was a guy I knew, Bud Friedman, who ran the Improv. And he asked me to write about her, and I did. And I went to see her, and she was opening for a deadpan comic named Jackie Vernon. And his audience didn't know what to make of her, but I thought she was brilliant. And I said, "You're really funny. You should talk more." And she said, "What, you got any lines?" And I started writing for her. And mostly that was all Chicago jokes. And I was the TV critic for the Chicago Tribune at the time. So I would call the other TV critics who I'd met on junkets and ask them what was going on. What's funny in Cincinnati? Who can we make fun of in Cincinnati? And she would arrive in these towns armed with local material, which knocked them out. She wanted to be more political. This was during the Nixon Watergate years. And she's always been passionately political, but she didn't want to go overboard, but she always wanted to lace her comic stuff with political stuff. And I was happy to do that. That was fun. And so, it went bigger. At the Tubs, a lot of it was very, very directed towards the gay community that was at the Tubs. But once she was out in the wild, everyone realized that she had tremendous appeal to all kinds of people who felt like they were unconventional and she was unconventional. And seeing her succeed made them feel like they could do it too. That they felt better about themselves. I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and said, Bette Midler changed my life. I said, yeah, she changed my life before she changed yours. But yes, I get it. Absolutely. I mean, and of course she does too. She doesn't talk about it because, that was not her goal, but it's a nice ancillary effect.
I know that her act used to be really crazy and edgy, and she looked, she didn't have like a polished look about her.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Can you kind of talk about that? Like how she would come out on stage and like, what did she look like and what was she talking about?
At the beginning, she came out, and when I first saw her, she was wearing Toreador pants and a sash around, like a cummerbund, and springolators, which were very high heels from the 40s. And she had all this red hair and a gardenia in her hair as a sort of homage to Billie Holiday. And she had, and she was wearing a blouse that was open to the waist and no bra, which she said this was the 70s. She said it's a feminist statement. because she would come out singing Shaboom, which was a hit of a Shaboom, Shaboom, yeah, and the boobs were flying, and the audience kind of, forks would be dropping, and they'd never seen anything quite like it. And then she graduated to Bustier's, and she would come out with like a Marie Antoinette corset and a couple of flowers in the cleavage. I mean, she had many different, they were all variations. It was Trash with Flash was the overarching idea, but that applied to the music, which was what really was, her killer talent, other than being a great diva who could change the mood in a second. She mined songs that were considered throwaways and found the beauty in them and brought them back. Her first hit was Do You Want to Dance, which was a very jitterbuggy, do you want to dance? And she turned it into this exotic, sort of passionate expression of languor and seduction. And I mean, she didn't want to dance with them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was a metaphor for several other activities. But, and you felt it in the song. You felt it in her delivery. And, of course, Barry Manilow was her music director then, and he was the master of we called them Merry Modulate, because the key change would come at the end, and that would always kind of like make the thing so exciting. They had a brilliant collaboration.
Were you go ahead.
And they became a big star all in a minute.
2 quick questions. Were you her first writer? And also, is she your longest collaborator?
Yes. Well, first of all, no, her first writer was a guy, the late Bill Hennessy, who was a hairdresser at Bergdorf's under the name Mr. Gerard. And they were friends. And I think he had worked backstage on Fiddler on the Roof, which she was in for 3 years. And so she
played one of the daughters in Fiddler.
She was Seitel, the one who got married.
Yes. Far from the home I love.
That's right. Yeah. So he was the first, and I was, I think, the second, and then the late Jerry Blatt, who we all collaborated with for many years until he passed, and then other contributors as we went along. But she's not the first person I wrote for. The first person I wrote for was actually Kay Ballard, who I met in Chicago, and she's the first person a lot of people wrote for because she had an eye and she collected great material as a result. But Bette has been the longest, stand there. It's 55 years. Excuse me, get me the digitalis.
Aside from Barry Manilow, who was her piano player and musical director, who else was she? Like, who were her? I know that she was a backup singer for Jennifer Lewis. She was a harlot. Jennifer was a harlot.
Yeah, that was later. That was in the 80s.
Who else? Who else was she surrounded by?
There was some backup singers that we called Miss M Celestial Choir, and prominent among them was Melissa Manchester and Cissy Houston, Whitney's mother. But she was not on stage. She was in the studio. Melissa was on stage with Bette at the beginning, and then she got a record deal, and she became Melissa Manchester. So the first actual harlots that we put together as the harlots were Sharon Redd, who became a disco star before she passed of AIDS, and Robin Grion, who is still out there, and Charlotte Crosley, who is still out there, and I did Hairspray with actually many years later as she played Motormouth. And then we had many other people that came in, including Jennifer, Katie Segal. I'm trying to think of other famous ones. Those are the ones who became famous. Big backup singers in that movie that with Darlene Love is in, about backup singers. I can't think of the title.
Is that 1,000 Feet from Stardom?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, that's it. They were all. A lot of those girls were harlots. Franny McCartney, Linda Hart, who was on Broadway and Anything Goes with Patty LuPone. So, but the famous ones are the ones who were on television, Jennifer and Katie.
Was Luther Vandross
He was off stage. He weighed 400 pounds, and he was a huge backup singer. He and Barry Manilow did commercials, wrote commercials, and Luther would sing on them. And he would sit on the stool off stage and do backup vocals because he was afraid to come on stage. He conquered that. He lost some weight and went into the studio and did his own albums and had to sort of sell himself, as a kind of very romantic. He and Teddy Pendergrass were the very romantic Barry White kind of singers, but they were much more Silk and Al Green kind of music. And of course, with that, a gigantic career.
So he would sing harmony with Bette from off stage?
Off stage, yeah. Yeah. And occasionally he would hit a high note that she couldn't reach.
Michael Bennett, who of course did Dreamgirls, what did he choreograph?
He choreographed the original Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, and some of which is still used, by the way. And he and Andre DeShields, who is now, after Hadestown, he's like a bigger star than ever. These were all friends of Bette's in the theater when she was a fiddler. And Michael was just starting his choreography career. And so he did that. And Norma Kamali, who was hanging around, did the original costumes for the first time we actually went on the road with the Harlettes. She was like a sponge, Bette. I mean, they were all attracted to her because they knew she was the real thing. And as a result, she had very gifted people working with her. And some of the musicians, they're big people Will Lee and Sid McGuinness, they were Letterman's band.
Yes.
They're all like big session people who she worked with. Bucky Pizzarelli, who was John Pizzarelli's father, and at the time was like the session guitarist everybody used. I mean, she had all of them. She was the mother figure, if that's the word.
Earlier at the very beginning, when I mentioned Amber Martin doing the Bette Midler Continental Baths Act, you mentioned you're friendly with Daniel Nardicchio, who runs the Ice Palace now. Have you performed out on Fire Island? Or
I did, yes. Oh, I've done Cherry Grove. I did the Ice Palace for Danny, and then I did Whitehall.
Yes, in the Pines.
In the Pines. I MC there's an annual thing that the dance community does that raises money for Broadway Cares and stuff.
What was your experience on Fire Island? Did you?
Oh, it was incredible because it's a great mix of older and younger, and I was still fresh off Hollywood Square, so that even the younger ones knew me, and it was that Broadway Cares benefit's fabulous. They built a stage out over the bay on the bay side of Pines. It's somebody's house. It used to be Jerry Herman's house 100 years ago.
Yes.
I forget, there was a throuple lived in it at the time. One of the first throuples.
Do you ever go out to Provincetown?
Oh yeah, I played there every year for years. For about 20 years, I did Town Hall. I did everything. Pilgrim House. I did Crown and Anchor. I did Post Office Cabaret. You name it, I did.
Yeah.
I'll go back and do the Blue Note. I'll do Leah Delaria's act.
Do you have a preference between Fire Island and Provincetown, just as a gay vacation destination?
Oh yeah, I like Provincetown because it's more. It's more. What's the word? Not homogenized, but heterogeneous. First of all, it's easier. You can drive around. Fire Island is for younger people because there's a lot of walking, and I am trying to reduce the schleppage in my life. On the other hand, there's probably more sex going on Fire Island, which I'm not trying to reduce. So
was there a defining moment where when anybody needed to do a benefit or an awards show that suddenly something shifted to, you got to get Bruce?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I became known through her, and then I began writing for other people. And when variety television disappeared, award shows proliferated. And so it was an easy transition to write for people, to do things on those shows, little presentations, especially for actors who didn't have a character to play. You'd give them something to play. So that was that. And the whole benefit movement happened when AIDS happened, and we realized that the government wasn't going to help. So we had to raise the money ourselves. And that's what people in show business do. We go to the barn and get the costumes and put on a show. And the thing of it was, I would go to people and I would say, look, please do my benefit, please appear. I will write your show. So that's how I became acquainted with all the bigger diseases, because I would do, this one had cystic fibrosis, this one was supporting cerebral palsy. So I wound up knowing about all this stuff because I had to write about it, because it was very much tit for tat, quid pro quo. That's because people were afraid to be associated with AIDS, at the beginning.
Tell me about writing for Roseanne and Joan Rivers. Well,
they're both brilliant, funny talents. Roseanne, of course, was the blue collar comedian. I mean, she was a sort of suburban housewife and had a whole different attitude. This kind of laconic attitude towards life. I like when men read maps. Only a man would think an inch equals a mile. And Joan, of course, was from the other end. Joan was kind of from money, and she was kind of like a Jewish princess on a tear, but also very self-deprecating because she was not the pretty girl. Roseanne, was the fat girl, but she was already married. She already had kids, so she was the domestic goddess. That was her thing. So you wrote there were two different voices to write for.
For each of them, were they for special projects or benefits?
They were they did their acts. They had stand-up acts, and then of course, with Roseanne became a TV star, so she worked sporadically as a performer, but she did do a lot of appearances that I would write for. And Joan, of course, did everything. Joan hosted a talk show. Of course, Roseanne hosted a talk show too, briefly, and I was a guest. Because I was on Hollywood Squares then.
Yes.
So Joan just was always working, so she always needed material, and her line always was $7. I pay $7 a joke. And this town is filled with people who have framed checks from Joan Rivers for $7. Nobody ever cashed them. They wanted them as souvenirs. So Melissa there's a revenue stream sitting out there somewhere, Melissa.
On that same note, I love your story of how cheap Barbra Streisand was.
Well, yeah, she was notoriously cheap, and this is going back 25 years. But I made a joke about it when she made me an offer, and she was selling furniture. She was getting a new house and didn't want the old stuff, so she was selling it. And I said, "This offer is low," and she said, "What should I do?" I said, "Sell a lamp."
But what was the gig? Was this for her Vegas act?
This was for her first. This was like 88, 89 when she had done a benefit for Dukakis, who was running for president. And she decided to go back live and do a tour for the first time. And it was that tour, the first one. She's done many since. But it was the first time she'd worked live for more than one night, since Funny Girl. So it was a big deal. She called Robin Williams and she said, "I need jokes." And he said, "Oh, call Vilanch." She said, "Oh, I talked to him. He's too expensive." So I guess her lamps must really have gone for a lot of money.
So did you never work with her?
Oh, yeah. I worked with her before that for free, but I did benefits with her. And I never worked with her after. She was annoyed because I told the story and it was in the movie. And the movie came out the same week that the New York Times ran a big story about her weird financial dealings with people. Mm-hmm. And it was lumped into that. And she took umbrage. But it's all over now. We're older and wiser, and I have more chins.
I think it's so. If we talk about the Oscars, you wrote for the Oscars for a decade.
I wrote 25 of them. I was a head writer, which meant nothing in terms of money. It just meant somebody had to have the title and was the wrangler of the other writers on the show.
So a few things about the Oscars that I want to touch on. You've talked about how it was very difficult to kind of link up and get on the same page as Ellen. Like, there are a couple of different types of hosts. People who have talk shows already have a writing staff. Like, I actually just interviewed Liz Feldman, who wrote for Ellen's talk show. She won an Emmy for writing the Oscars for Ellen. That's a perfect example. And those types of people really just want to work with the writers who already know their voice. And what was the deal? She was just very resistant to let anybody infiltrate that protected circle she had?
I think at that point she was scared. I don't know that the talk show it was always successful, but I think she was looking in the long term. She she had gotten so battered after she came out, and the sitcom was canceled, and she had tried another sitcom. It didn't work. When she had her cocoon that was working on her talk show, the daytime show, she brought them over to the Oscars, and she didn't want to deal with anything else. She didn't want to deal with anybody outside of it. And that was difficult because I was kind of a liaison between her staff and the other people who were writing the rest of the show. And, it just made it hard. And it was painful for me because we knew each other. We were friends before she came out and remained friends. And then all of a sudden she was isolating herself. So it was not a pleasant experience. After I left the show officially, she came back and hosted it again and was much easier from what I understand. It was much better.
Oh, that's interesting.
She was much more at ease with everything because she had done the Emmys after, I think, the 9/11 year. So she was just on clearer footing for herself. I mean, it was a ridiculous end to that era to suddenly become the queen of mean, so, and that's all been unresolved, but, she's so fucking rich. She's now living in England with Portia, who's adorable. And we had the same agent for years. We had the same manager, actually, Portia and I, when Portia met Ellen.
Oh, really?
That's my movie. When Portia met Ellen.
Very interesting.
Portia came over from Australia and was working on
So wait,
TV.
was this when Portia was on Ally McBeal that you had the same?
We had the same manager, yeah.
Yeah. Going back to the Oscars, I have a weird connection to Billy Crystal. My mom went to high school with Billy Crystal. And we knew his parents, we knew his family. So growing up, this was like the one celebrity connection I had. And it just so happened, I grew up in the era of When Harry Met Sally and City Slickers, and he was hosting the Oscars. And I really think that is the last time I enjoyed watching an awards show. Truly the last time I remember enjoying watching an awards show was, when he would insert himself into Titanic and Jerry Maguire and fighting with Tom Cruise in the clips. There was such an air of creativity to those that has never been replicated. Do you agree that that was the last gasp of like real creativity and entertainment regarding the Oscars? Or is that just me being nostalgic for my childhood?
Well, I think partially, yes. It is. We are nostalgic for things we saw when we were kids that we adored. And he was the first to do any of that stuff. And we kept piling on. First it was a medley, and then the film clips happened the year, wound up being the year The English Patient won 9 Oscars. Had we known that was going to happen, we might not have done it. But at the time, the biggest release of the year was the reissue of Star Wars. And as is not unusual anymore, but was then, the Academy nominated a lot of little movies and people from little movies. And the mass audience had no idea what any of these pictures were. And so we thought it would be fun to insert Billy into all of them to give them a taste of these movies. Mm-hmm. And because, as Billy said, the nominees for Best Actor are Tom Cruise and a bunch of other guys, because nobody knew who the other guys were, and Tom didn't win. So we did The English Patient. They were movies like Fargo, which became a cult classic, but then not so much. Secrets and Lies, Rush. There were all these little movies that were nominated. So that became a template for something to do. But Billy is one of the last of the great vaudevillians. He'll come out, he'll sing, he'll dance, he'll do jokes, he can act. He can do all of these, and he'll throw himself into the stuff. But they each have their own style. Whoopi has her style, and Letterman had his, and Hugh Jackman didn't have one because he's never hosted it. Well, we'd done 2 Tony shows, but he was doing the Oscars, so he did a musical number because he's a musical guy. So they each approach it differently, but I think they're all entertaining in their own way. Listen, Conan had a great hit this year with it because he was very smart, and he opened with something that Billy would have done, emerging from Demi Moore's body in The Substance. Yes. And I think I think a lot of people thought it was gross, but a lot of people hadn't seen The Substance. They had no idea what was going on. So that
was definitely a nod to the Billy Crystal era. That is exactly what Billy Crystal would have done.
Yeah, yeah.
We have to talk about your final year as the head writer of the Oscars was the infamous, and maybe this also, for some reason, I loved this because it was so bizarre and interesting, the year that Anne Hathaway co-hosted the Oscars with James Franco.
Yeah.
To me, this was fascinating to watch. Like, it was inherently interesting. So this is I guess you didn't, for some reason you did not include this in your book. It seemed like a bad idea at the time because this was a quote unquote flop. Why didn't you include this? And also, can we talk about it?
Because I only wanted to do one Oscar thing, and that was the first one I had done, the Alan Carr show with Rob Lowe and Snow White.
Yes.
And the scandal that followed. Nothing followed the Franco Hathaway show. What followed was Gil Cates, who had produced 17 shows, didn't produce that one, but he died. The head of the Academy retired. The executive director retired. New blood was brought in. Everybody who had been involved was washed away. And I didn't feel like writing about that. And also, I thought it was terribly produced, but I know the two guys who produced it, and they're friends of mine, and they're alive, unlike Alan, who's gone. So I didn't see any percentage in swatting at people who could swat back. I didn't see there was, and I felt bad about Franco, but he's apologized a million times. I run into him here and there, and he's still apologizing to me.
Can you take me into the writing of that show? Like, first of all, did they have their own writers, or were they heavily leaning on you? Were they contributing to the writing like, what made that such a disaster?
Well, it was a bad idea. It really was a bad idea at the time. To try to youth the show up, they found two young movie stars who had absolutely no chemistry and no reason to have any chemistry, and they paired them. They had also, neither of them had ever done anything like this before, but Anne is a precision instrument, and she knows the role that she's playing. And Jimmy, I think, was just afraid. He said to me later, I did it because I knew I'd get nominated for the show, the movie where he gnawed off his arm, 27 hours.
127 hours, yes.
I would lose to Colin Firth, who played George the Sixth, and had a speech impediment.
The King's Speech, I remember that.
I could sit there and wait to lose, or I could get up and have some fun hosting the show. But I don't think he realized what it actually entailed, and he didn't know any of us. And he was advised by Seth Rogen, from what I understand. He said, these are all Billy Crystal writers. You have to bring in your own guys. So he went to Judd Apatow, and Judd sent 4 people over who'd never done anything like this before, and he didn't know what they were doing. And we wrote stuff, and I don't think we used any of it because it just wasn't good. And they're nice guys, and they're talented, and I'm sure they've gone on to things. I don't remember them. But one of them wore a hat all the time. That's all I remember. I mean, a hat, not a baseball, a hat. And Anne got scared, so she brought in a writer, a woman who was absolutely brilliant. I think it was Jenny Bick. I think she brought in Jenny Bick.
Jenny Bick Jenny Bick's from Sex and the City?
Yeah. And so that was the writing, and I was with the other writers, and there was just a kind of war going on between the management teams, and it was doomed, I think. And we knew going in it was going to be trouble. And one of the things that happened was I worked on a movie called Burlesque with Cher and Christina Aguilera.
Yes.
And there were 2 songs that we assumed would be nominated, and we figured we would have Cher and Christina on the show. And it turned out neither one of them was nominated. Well, in the interim, I had sat down with Franco, who said, I do a great Cher impression. And I thought, well, this would be hilarious if we introduce Cher and he starts singing and it's Franco and Cher walks out. And because she's game for anything, Cher, she's terrific, she's fierce. And then she wasn't nominated. But now doing a drag thing had sparked him, and he wanted to do one. So he came out as Marilyn Monroe from Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, The Number of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And we got one of the biggest laughs of the night doing that. But it was a forced error.
Yeah. So the work that you did on Burlesque, did you just were you on set writing punch-up lines?
Yeah, well, for Cher, because Cher's character ran a nightclub. She ran the Pussycat Dolls.
Yes.
And she was the MC. And there was a vague idea that it was like cabaret.
Yes.
She was the Holocaust was about to happen. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what, but of course it didn't measure up to cabaret in that regard. But the idea of her as the MC who was taking charge was great. However, she could only give them 12 days because she had tour dates, and so a lot of it got cut because there was no time to shoot a lot of it. But I was there nevertheless, and I walked out the door, and Diablo Cody walked in. But she was doing. I think she was beefing up Christina's part. I forget what it was. But there were 7 writers on the movie. I think finally everyone's contribution was so small, if I remember correctly, that the original writer was the only one who got the credit. He was also the director. So anyway, that was what happened that year. And I think I made the mistake of telling this story to somebody who repeated it somewhere. And as a result, the new group at the Academy initiated an NDA. So, you're not allowed to talk to the press at all about anything that happens on the show. So
as a result of this story, the Cher story at the Oscars?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can't talk about what happened. So, I mean, they're not, I think that's gone away. I think there still is NDA, but I think it's while the show is in progress, while the thing is in development. Afterwards, I guess, I don't know. Now if you could, I mean, God knows, Conan just dropped a whole load of stuff that he was not allowed to do on the show.
It's interesting because Howard Stern does that all the time. The comedian who hosted, I think she hosted the Golden Globes, she was on Howard Stern the next day, and she literally just runs down all of the jokes.
Nikki Glaser, Nikki
Glaser, yeah.
That's the Golden Globes. That's another proposition altogether. I've never done it, so.
You talk about the importance of saying yes, even when an idea seems bad.
Yes.
Why?
Well, then you'll get nothing accomplished. I mean, first of all, the bad idea, when it's a bad idea, and the next question is, how much are you paying? Oh, I think I can find a way to make that work. That's generally how they go. It's a venal thing, but it's also, life support. There are some things you can say, no, I'm just not going to do that. And that's because they generally don't, they're really speculative. But when they come to you with an offer and it can happen, you wind up saying, okay, I'll do it. And you look at a lot of people in a lot of movies and you say, why did you play that role? Because, they gave me a private plane or something like that. It's like when you were in improv, they teach you to say yes.
Yes, and.
When somebody puts something out there, oh my God, look at that giant whale. You can kind of say, what giant whale? Or you can kind of go, oh my God, it looks just like, Lizzo. I mean, some off the top of your head, crappy line, but that's improv. And that's the adventure.
And there is the ethos, like nobody sets out to make a piece of shit.
That's true. Yeah, nobody sets out to make a bad thing. Somebody thinks it's actually a good idea, and you cannot disabuse them of that notion.
When we were talking about, earlier, Barry Manilow, and I know you did work on the Brady Bunch variety special. You worked with Robert Reed. I was a huge fan, the reruns of the Brady Bunch as a kid. I love them. I used to record them on VHS, my best friend and I. And with Robert Reed and Barry Manilow, you were always out. Did it frustrate you that other actors were in the closet?
No, because it was 1976. And even though it was a few years after Stonewall, where politically active people were coming out, actors who wanted to play romantic leads or action leads in movies were not, because it was perceived that if the audience felt they couldn't kiss the girl, or if the audience felt that they're gay and so it doesn't make sense, you can't be an action hero or a Major League Baseball player or any of those things. So those people were very guarded, and so there was no stress about it. I mean, it was the only stress was you were keeping the secret, but it was kind of a given that that was the way it was going to be. I mean, people got more enlightened and began getting upset about it later on. What was interesting about Bob, two things. One was that he knew he couldn't come out because he was a leading man, and he wanted. Oddly enough, he had got an Emmy nomination for playing a transvestite, which is what they used to call cross-dressers before the idea of transgender happened. Seriously. And he was wonderful in the role, and that they didn't say, "Oh, well, he's a queen." They didn't say that. "Oh, he's an actor. It's a challenge." But I think the other reason, which is much more interesting, is that in the first iteration of the Brady Bunch in 1970, which I was not involved in, Robert took on the role of surrogate dad to the kids on the show because he felt that some of them were viewed by their parents as revenue streams. And so he became their dad. Now, of course, when we got to our show, they were all teenagers, at least. And if he were to come out, it would immediately be branded a pedophile because it would come out how intimate, not the wrong word, but how involved he was in their private lives because he was their advocate. In many cases, and he liked that role, and I think he felt that he would be betraying the kids to make that about him when it was really about them, and so I think it was kind of a legitimate reason at the time, and certainly an exceptional one. I mean, how many other people were in that particular world, with the focus on them?
Absolutely. I actually want to ask a few other people that you've worked with. Steven Tyler of Aerosmith and Rosie O'Donnell. What did you do with Steven Tyler?
Steven Tyler, Aerosmith had a ride at Disney World. And we did a video that people saw while they were waiting online for the ride. And that was what I did. And it was funny. We had a good time. And I got friendly with Steven Tyler after that. And I think he was on a couple of award shows, and he asked me to write some stuff for him. And Rosie, I wrote hosted the Tony Awards one year, or maybe 2 years. So I wrote both, however many times she did it, I wrote those. And a couple of other things that she was involved in of that nature.
She used to shout you out personally by name on her talk show all the time. Well, would that just be so flattering that because at the time, I don't know how much of a public figure you were.
It was great. Whoopi did it recently while I was on The View with Whoopi, but she did it when Nikki Glaser was on about the Golden Globes. And she said, well, so Whoopi said, you hosted the Oscars and you did so well. And you didn't have James Franco, which was, of course, the joke. And Whoopi said, no, I had BRUCE VILANCH. And that was another joke. So I thought, well, okay, smell me.
Can you talk about the process? You brought up how it can be very easy to write for people like Robin Williams or people who already have a comedic stage persona. And it's much more difficult to write for actors who are introducing sort of those interstitial segments. Like if you're writing for Frances McDormand, she doesn't necessarily, she's someone that has like a wry.
She has an attitude, and you can use the attitude. I mean, she's iconoclastic and kind of anarchistic. And so you can use that. But a lot of people really are kind of blank. I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer's a wonderful movie star, but you don't see Michelle Pfeiffer at Carnegie Hall. She's so you have to kind of give her something to play, and she'll just be elegant. Johnny Depp was my favorite one because he said, I don't know how to read this. I don't know how to do this. And I said, well, why don't you pretend you're Captain Jack Sparrow or Hunter Thompson? These are two wacky characters he had played, buzzed out guys. And that became a kind of a stage persona for him. And he used it on talk shows all the time until he had to get serious, with Amber and the lawsuits and all that. So I don't think he's doing it anymore, but it had a good run.
How did you choose the title of your book? It seemed like a bad idea at the time.
Because as I did podcasts with people who were your age and younger, and they knew about these shows that I wrote before they were born. And they were all flops. I mean, they were all lousy ideas. and critically lambasted. And so I thought, there's a book in this about how you and survive. And I was fortunate in that Star Wars and the Brady Bunch and the Oscars are all still franchises today. They haven't gone away. So the young people continue to identify with them, and they find that interesting. And I got to throw in a lot of stuff that they would have no interest in whatsoever, and tried to make it interesting for them. But then I have, my queer nerdy readers who know all this stuff. So I didn't want to just write a memoir. I think I wanted to write a certain kind of book that was funny and different.
And I want to say, I'm an audiobook listener, and I think you did a great job with the audiobook. Oh. Was that process fun or torturous?
Oh, it was great. It was actually easy. I mean, it was a 2-day recording session, and unfortunately, we had to record during the fires, and so the air was lousy, and so I got a horse, and I had to go in and do a bunch of pickups. But that's minor compared to what happened to other people in the fires. But it's not ironic, but it's just bizarre that those were the days and we couldn't cancel because we had a deadline.
This has been so fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks. You too.
I loved your book. I know Daniel Dardicchio very well. I made a documentary about Fire Island, and he's part of it. And so I loved getting the Fire Island stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much. This will be out next week. Thank you.
Okay. Have fun.
Bye.